term or fourth?
Second.
Second.
This is my second term.
Yeah.
It is.
When did you start?
Okay.
Oh, when did I start?
Or when did
January 2019, and I'm on the ballot again in 26.
Okay. So it's a 4-year term.
4-year term. Yeah.
Okay, I was confused by that. Thank you. She is a graduate of Truman State University and holds a master's in public policy and a law degree, both from the University of Missouri. Prior to election as Boone County Clerk, Brianna served as an Assistant Attorney General in the Consumer Protection Division of the Missouri Attorney General's Office. And before that, she worked in the Missouri Secretary of State's office under former Secretary Jason Kander. In this position, she worked closely with local election authorities across the state to ensure that elections were simple, secure, and accessible for voters.
Okay, hold on.
Welcome, Brianna.
Thank you.
You know, Jason Kander was on 60 Minutes last week.
I saw an ad
That
for
was
that.
really nice
I didn't
about
see it yet.
getting those people out of Afghanistan.
Okay.
All right. I brought a presentation.
She did. I'm gonna see if I'm smart enough to pull it up. Everybody hide. I don't need all that. Need to. Somewhere up here is probably present
I
mode.
think it's in view.
Thanks. This is probably not what you're used to because it's the poor man's LibreOffice. No, it's probably right under all this. If I
It's
could-
showing on the screen.
Yeah, it's just showing. It's not showing the good view. It's showing the.
Can you write?
I think if you click slideshow, it might work up there at the.
There it is.
Uh,
Yep. There.
Yeah.
I'm just having trouble
Awesome.
seeing it with all the. We've got a bunch of stuff over the top of it. Okay, let's do it.
all right. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the invitation, and I think I tried to make this presentation equal parts like data and experiences, and then just kind of talk about some of the lessons that we've learned for our office and plans moving forward and things, but also happy to take questions and things like that too. I really like doing more discussion-oriented conversations anyway. So I'm going to jump into data, and not exactly in order of the experience of elections, but it's more of a like, this is the things that I thought about that were the most, I don't know what I want to say. Yeah, most salient. That's great. The most salient about the last couple months. If you want to, I think that.
You go beep
Okay.
or something.
Yeah.
Just throw something at me.
So overall, there's nothing up in the top that you have to worry about.
Oh, sorry. I was trying to see if I could get rid of this. Yeah. Okay.
So overall, we had 68% turnout. I think that most people know that our election results are on our website, so you can look at them precinct by precinct if you would like. But I have tried to pull out some of them, and they've been shared on social media too, about how different parts of Boone County did show out in very different numbers. And these are the numbers that include both absentee voting and on election day. So these are the total ones that there were actually quite a few that had at least over like 75% turnout. I just made the cutting off point 80% so that I wasn't showing like the entire map. So a lot of that 68% turnout was buoyed by these 6 polling places, turnout areas that came out in very, very high numbers. One of the areas that I was kind of surprised about was the #1 area, which is 18 to 19, because those are pure county voters. If you look at our precincts, if they're a combination of a number and a letter, that means that they're in the city of Columbia. If they are just a number, that means they are purely county voters. So purely county voters in precincts 18 and 19 had the highest amount of turnout this year. That's the Rocheport area, and then kind of heading in east of that. So I was not surprised at all to see the 4th ward turning out, because the fourth ward always turns out. It's one of the areas that we know is going to have very high rates of turnout. And it was not surprising at all to see that. And the Ashland area, if I had gone, I think, to number 9 instead of number 6, you would have seen that the other Ashland precincts were also in there. So the entirety of Southern Boone has a very, very high turnout. Shout out to Dave, because I know he's on this call. We see that not just in November elections, that is the trend that we see in April elections, August elections. Southern Boone is a very high turnout area.
Just a couple of questions. 68% overall turnout seems low to me for a presidential election and one that we had we had a United States senator. Is that kind of what you were expecting, or is that?
We were expecting 70% because in 2020 we had 70%. In terms of total ballots cast, we were slightly under 2020's number, but our population has increased. So I think it is on average with what we saw in other Missouri counties.
Yeah.
So everybody expected a slightly higher turnout, but that didn't really bear out. And I think if you were an election worker at a polling place on election day, you saw exactly why we had 68% turnout. So I was slightly surprised, but also, I mean, when I went out into the world, like the grocery stores and stuff like that, the election was not on the top of a lot of people's minds. If you were working on campaigns, absolutely.
Yeah.
But when I just went to other places, it was not really something that they thought about, or if they did, they were very undecided and not super interested in thinking about it.
Yeah, I think everything you got highlighted there, don't those tend to be Republican areas?
In my mind.
I don't know about the little dark spot in the middle, but it still seems like the Democrats didn't turn out this in Boone County as much as they could have.
So I will say that I think the gap has narrowed a little bit.
Okay.
One of the things that, and I don't have a slide on it, but what I will say is we had, I can't remember if it's on here or not. It is. So one of the big changes that was implemented it was part of House Bill 1878, which included no excuse absentee voting in 2022, the photo ID provision, but then also being able to change your address across counties on election day. Those, more often than not, are college students. And just anecdotally, I did not run any numbers on this, and I don't plan to. I was probably responsible for between 45–50% of doing the address changes. Like, I was physically doing the address changes, and those have optional party affiliation on them. Many, many, many of those people were college students with Republican affiliation. So they're coming from Lee Summit, they're coming from St. Charles, they're coming from Republican areas. And so they were added. We had 645 added on election day alone. So it's not surprising to me. I think that there are areas that, I mean, it's not a high turnout is the thing. None of the areas where college students live got into that 80% range. It was more like 50% range. But, you know, as we're adding people, it does narrow some of those margins. So, so yeah, I did find that interesting, at least anecdotally. I haven't run any math on it. And most people, I would say, don't really affiliate with anything. So it was just kind of surprising to see college students choose an affiliation at all. Most of them don't. So I think that's the basic story on turnout. We had a relatively quiet election day itself. Beep, beep. Maybe.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to talk about the juxtaposition. Like I said, I'm kind of going to jump back and forth between election day and overall and all of that. But absentee voting, we as an office, just to give people perspective, hired over 50 people in order to conduct no excuse absentee voting. It's a very expensive endeavor. It's very involved, and our full-time staff is only 8 people. So to spin up 50 temporary employees on top of needing 600 to run the polls, is a lot of stress on the office. I'm very proud of our office for delivering on that. We had 5 satellite locations total over the 2 weeks that we had no excuse absentee voting. And on any given day in the Boone County Government Center, we had about 1,500 people coming through. That kind of ramped up over the last few days, but even in the first few days of the 2-week period, we had at least 1,000 voters voting. So I included pictures that we took of different areas. So that top one is Centralia when we were in Centralia. The bottom one on the right is Ashland when we were in Southern Boone. And then the one on the left is every morning, every morning before everybody came in at 8 a.m., we would have to make sure everything was all set up in commission chambers. That was one of the, I want to say that was probably like the Thursday before the election, maybe the Friday before the election. And that's only one part of the line because we also have people lining up on 9th Street. So the hardest part, and just to give you a glimpse of lesson learned, is that the Boone County Government Center is not a great polling place.
Yeah.
We don't have another option, but one of the things that we went through in our own office debrief was our own need for, in addition to having the temporary workers that are actually checking people in, we need more traffic control. We need people to do the logistics side of things, because marrying those 2 lines from 9th Street and the courthouse area together in the morning was very hard. And then navigating through the actual building itself as we got closer to election day was very challenging. Still, I think one of the things that I wanted to point out was our average wait times were about a half an hour to 35 minutes. So even though they look like incredibly intimidating lines, the only one that was really, really problematic was the one at the Columbia Mall. And that was a size issue as well. People waited in line at the Columbia Mall for about 2 hours.
Oh my.
And that's simply because there's not enough space in the storefront that we had to like physically sit people down. We could check them in as fast as possible, but they didn't have anywhere to sit down and fill out a ballot. So those are all things that I know that we can alleviate. Everybody in the state was surprised at the amount of turnout for no excuse absentee voting. I think it's fantastic. It's exactly why clerks wanted this to happen.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll get to continue doing it. And as long as we do, then we'll have hopefully more that comes out of future elections to more people that want to do this.
Do you feel like because so many people had a chance to vote early, did that take a little bit of stress off of the actual election
It took
day?
a ton of stress off.
So
of
it made the actual election day a little less crazy.
Yeah, and
Okay.
that's a lesson that we learned in 2020, which is why we were. It's why we do weekend voting and all of these other things. Oh, and I didn't mention that we were at Mizzou at Memorial Union for a week leading up to election day too. Although that was kind of in net neutral because we could add voters because they crossed county lines. So it was like we had several hundred voters a day, but so many of them were ones that we were pulling in from other counties that it wasn't touching our overall turnout because we were like, well, they were a Jackson County voter.
Yeah.
Now they're a Columbia voter and they voted here, but it doesn't affect our overall turnout because they were
in the original
coming from Jackson. So it was very good from, I think, a customer service perspective, but it didn't really help our actual like administration.
In regards to the question about waiting times and election day versus early voting, the early voting lines were longer and the wait times were longer than anything we had, except for the first half hour when we first opened at 6 a.m. in Southern Boone. And that's the opposite of what every other election has been. We've always had big lines and wait times down there. And there were so many early voters that it really alleviated the lines. We had minutes go by where there wasn't anybody in line, which is really unusual.
Yeah, and I think that mirrored a lot of November 2020, where people showed out really early at 6:30, and we saw a turnout over the course of the day that just steadily declined by the point where in 2020, some polls really didn't have anybody come in after 5:30. Every single one of our polls was back by 8:45 on election night. Because there just wasn't anybody waiting in line. Because that people would say, well, how long is it going to take? And I'd say, I don't know, because if you have somebody in line at 7 o'clock, they might have to run through that line. But nobody was there at 7 to vote. So they could finish up and get everything done in a pretty quick turnaround.
Okay, Brianna, and as far as the you were showing on the first slide, kind of how the precincts added up, being the sixth myself, we got a lot of college students in sixth. So did they show more of a turnout? Could you tell? Or no?
Not particularly. So this map is kind of a heat map of the places where absentee voting was extremely popular. So
Yeah,
a lot of our college students
six,
did
yeah.
absentee vote. We had under 2,000 college students vote on election day at Memorial Union. So, I mean, total, we had some over at our office as well, but total, we had more, I think, less than what we expected, but I think it's because so many of them voted absentee beforehand. So it's hard because where the college students live is commingled with Lenore Woods. And Lenore Woods is so big that they throw off kind of any kind of context because they've got thousands of voters that often are on the permanent disability list. So they vote absentee either by mail or in person. And Lenore is one of our polling places. So it's very easy for residents at Lenore to vote.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see here that area, the 66K and all of that, proportionally were much more popular for absentee voting, but that's a combination of the college students that voted absentee and the Lenore Woods folks.
And now, no, never mind. I'll think of it later.
Question, any comparisons with Boone County early voting numbers versus other?
So the state has just certified the election statewide yesterday. So I haven't seen any comparisons. I would say overall, we were pretty on par. I think it's hard to do a true comparison because proportionally, you know, if you're a county that only has 12,000 voters in it, which is a lot of our counties, they can say, oh, we had like 70% of our turnout was absentee votes. And I'm like, well, that's not, you know, that's not as many as what we had. And so they could handle it on a daily basis. That might mean that they had 50 voters a day. And that's totally like, it's a lot more than what they're used to because they only have 1 or 2 staff people, but it's not, you know, logistically as challenging as trying to fit 1,000 people in a room that can't fit 1,000 people. So I would say, even without those comparisons, I think we probably would have seen a higher absentee turnout had we been able to have a larger location. Because I know that there are people that came and turned around once they saw the line, even when we assured them they'd be in and out in a half an hour. And we saw that all over social media too. Very, very few complaints because the voters that did come through the line went through so quickly. So it was like, you know, at the end of the day, it was just the people that were conjecturing how much time they'd have to spend doing it. But I think if we had a larger location, more people just would have come because they wanted to. It's very popular. And you can kind of see that here, 4th and 5th ward again, where you see higher turnout, you often see higher levels of absentee with the outlier of 1A and 60, and that is because of college students and Lenore Woods. And
I'm missing the like yellow is high turnout areas.
yellow is high absentee turnout areas.
That's right.
So I think it's over, I did the ones that were over 40% of the overall turnout was absentee. Lenore's was like 50.1. So half of 66K, 6F had already voted by the time we got to election day.
I remember now, Brianna. Basically, it was kind of interesting. I was here in charge of answering the phones for anybody wanting rides to the polls on election day. The only calls we got were from college kids wanting to get a ride downtown to change their address.
Yeah. That was one of the other lessons, I mean, we knew that this was going to happen in November 2022. We had several hundred people that did that in November of 2022. That was compounded by the college at the time having a series of golf carts that were bringing people.
Right.
I remember that now.
Oh,
Yes.
And that was organized by somebody that just happened to work at the zoo. And that person isn't there anymore.
Mhm.
So they didn't organize that. But we at least proactively created a different location for people to update their addresses and things, because in 22 it totally shut down our office to do that. So I think we're just going to see more and more of that, because it was a combination of people saying, oh, I thought I'd be able to make it home and I can't, or I don't want to go fill out an absentee ballot to be mailed, I'll just do it here. So I actually think, especially for that week before Election Day for absentee voting, we caught a lot of people that otherwise just wouldn't have voted. So I think that that's really helpful. I also wonder, and I can't really look at it in any way because it would just be a hypothetical. I wonder if we hadn't had that possible, how much lower our turnout would have been. Because that's a lot of people that wouldn't have had the chance to vote otherwise. You gotta keep clicking because it's got, you know. Okay.
Fanciness.
One of those hidden.
So as I sort of mentioned, the what I'm hopeful for, this is comparisons of April 2022 was before we had no excuse absentee voting.
Yeah.
And our absentee turnout, and this is total, this is mail and in person combined, was about 5%. That is historically steady over time. Anytime before April of 2022, our absentee turnout was about 5% of our overall turnout. We saw that jump in 22 because November, that was the first time people could do it, and we got to 14%. And that I think is a consequence of people getting a taste of it in 2020 because of the COVID excuses. And then we started dipping down again once we got to lower salient elections.
There we go. Yeah.
And it came up a little bit even for August of 24. But the market difference that I saw this time was that the campaigns were pushing no excuse absentee. I could not for the life of me get anybody to share that we even had no excuse absentee voting available between 2022 and I'd say September of 24. For those 2 years, nobody would talk about it. So voters didn't know about it. Literally every voter that came in between 22 and 24 would say, thank you so much for doing this. I had no idea it was an option. They don't say that anymore.
Good.
Now everybody's aware that it happens.
Yeah.
But they didn't have a side. I mean, we put it in our sample ballot mailings. We have it on our website. It's available everywhere. We did weekend locations. Our busiest time for any of these ones, it was a good day for us to get 100 people at an absentee voting location. And I think that's what the big change is too, that we saw, that we're also now kind of rethinking about no excuse absentee voting, is that was also true in 2020. In November of 2020, we had the same about 30,000 people vote absentee before Election Day. But that was spread out over 6 weeks. And it was a half and half of people that voted by mail and people that voted early, because the COVID excuse applied to both. No excuse absentee only applies to in person, and it only happens over 2 weeks. So those 30,000 people we then had to shove into a condensed period of time in a condensed location. And that's why I say that I think we would see even more of it. But it truly was, I think, the first ballot cycle where I saw mailers that said no excuse absentee voting is available. I saw social media that said no excuse absentee voting is available. I didn't see any of that. And it certainly wasn't in November of 2022 because it was still so new, nobody wanted to talk about it. But I'm very curious. It'll be really interesting to see if city council and school board candidates incorporate it into their materials and their conversations, because it's quite possible we drop back down to 10% being the overall. I don't think that it will, because it's not really a anomaly anymore. It's not really something that is
Yeah.
still new to people that they need to, you know, test it out first. So I think it may be our new normal. I hope that it's our new normal. That was kind of the whole point of us as clerks
Yeah.
wanting to have it. And even with all of the logistical stresses and resources that every county had to deal with, I have yet to hear a county say that they regret pushing for it. If anything, many of them want to expand it to longer. And we've always wanted, like as an association, across the board, bipartisan, we want 6 weeks. We want 6 weeks of all of it. Knowing that, you know, the first 2 or 3 weeks of absentee voting, people still don't turn out because they're still making up their minds. But to be able to spread out those 30,000 people over a longer period of time would be really wonderful. It would make a big difference. So I also wanted to highlight, this is the equipment, everybody has used it, so I'm sure most people are familiar with it, but one of the new things that we did in August that was a game changer for November, because we couldn't have done No Excuse without it, is that one in the bottom right corner, which is called the poll print. The poll print allowed us to, when the voter checked in on the poll pad, immediately print their ballot without having to bring pre-printed ballots to the polls or worry about what location somebody was coming to vote at. Every single ballot style was available. We had 104 ballot styles for this election alone, which is our lowest number of ballot styles that we create. April has way more than that. So having those just be able to be printed one at a time and on demand greatly reduced all of the waste that we have when we have to print ballots in advance, but it also just made it that much better for customer service. So I really appreciate all those 50 people, 55 people that we hired to bring on, were in charge of running these things. They were so incredible and fast learners and created a really great experience for voters. But that equipment we bought in right before August, so like June was when we purchased them. They're manufactured by the same company that makes the actual iPad, the poll prints. So poll prints and poll pads are the same family. And they were really fantastic to work with for turning around how fast we could get those so that we could use them for August. And then once we all got familiar with them, it was really nice to just turn around and use them in November too. So we'll keep using those as well. We also have them at our central polling locations, which is really nice because then we don't have to worry about running out of certain ballot styles or things like that if there's a higher turnout from one precinct or something like that.
Well, that is the question. If it's so much more efficient and saves pre-printing costs, do you have plans to expand it to all polling locations?
So I think we're still working out some of it. They're very heavy.
No.
They're very large and very heavy. They look like, you know, tiny little things here, but the cards are just as big as the DS200s.
Cool.
And they're heavier because they include a printer and a whole bunch of other accessories with them. So I am not like adverse to the idea. It's similar to what St. Louis County does, which is why they can do vote anywhere, everywhere. But theirs is more streamlined. This is a little more of a, we're retrofitting in a process that we already have. So I don't anticipate it really being everywhere unless there is like a total need for it. But I don't know that we're there yet. But for absentee voting, I would say the other thing that this allowed us to do, because customer service was great, my little data heart, it also allowed us, this is like really down in the weeds, but before, when we would do absentee voting in central polling locations, we had our 104 ballot styles, for example, but then we would create faces, which were a second version of ballot styles, which looked exactly the same, except instead of saying, all right, we need to break apart all the ballot styles by the polling place and the splits that they have, we're going to do it by the whole county. So for the whole county, how many different versions of a ballot may you have? And there's really only like 10. But if you only do 10 ballot styles, they all get collapsed into one precinct called absentee, Central 1, Central 2, however that is. So if you look at our November 2020 numbers, that's why the results say here's all the precincts, and then here's the absentee precinct, and
In
here's
one
the
chunk.
central one precinct as a chunk, and you can't divide it down anymore. We stopped doing faces once we had the poll print available because we didn't have to manage all the different ballot styles. So now when you look at our results, they're all in the precincts where they're supposed to go, which is a lot easier to understand. Moving forward, it'll be a lot better for real like analysis and things like that. And it also helps us because then we can see, okay, which polls really are turning out more, which ones have more like likelihood to be voting absentee, and it helps us make decisions about planning things. Beep. I like to throw this in here just because military and overseas voting never comes up, and it's so interesting because it's a pretty critical part of our office. It's one of the only things that is federally mandated. So if we don't comply with military and overseas voting requirements, then we're in trouble with federal government and not just the state government.
Yeah.
So we had over 50 countries represented. There's actually more than that of the ones that asked for them. Some of them asked for them, and then just because of mail slow and stuff like that, we didn't get them back from them. So these are the over 50 countries that we received ballots back from, but we actually sent them to closer to like 70.
Wow.
Over 300 voters returned their ballots from those 50 countries. A lot of them from Canada. And the longest trip a ballot made was to Australia. So we had them kind of speckled all over the place, and it's always kind of fun. It's like a nice little thing in the office that we can feel good about too, because overseas and military voters sometimes don't expect to really get their ballot to count. And so it's nice to be able to assure them, yeah, we do. And we get over 300 of them. So it's not like it's sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It's a very good process.
So I just popped up the chat because I noticed we had 8 things in here.
Yeah.
Dave Taylor says that those things print one of those ballots on demand in 11.6 seconds.
You like to do that. So the best
timing
part,
it.
because I go to all of the satellite locations, and the best part is just working with everybody. Like elections is so human oriented and everything anyway, but that was whenever Dave would check somebody in, he'd be like, takes 11.6 seconds, and then he'd count. And the voter would wait there. It was so great. And when we first bought them, I actually talked to another county that used them, and they said, oh yeah, what we'd like to tell them is, here's this ballot created especially for you.
Uh-huh.
So it's a
That's
nice
sweet.
little perk of it too.
Okay, there's print guides about printers, 0 failures after thousands that he printed, sometimes downtimes for toner and paper.
True. Yes.
Replacement
Sometimes
value.
you're like, oh shoot, it's not printing. How come there's no toner?
Uh-huh.
So we got really good at doing those things on the fly.
Okay, ready?
So do you have the list of the countries that actually
Yes.
sent back the ballots and got counted?
Yes. Not on me though.
I was just kind of wondering stuff.
Oh yeah, South Korea's on there. South Korea is on there. A lot of really interesting ones that I was like, oh, I didn't know that we had people from Boone County that live there.
Stationed there, yeah.
So they're residents of Boone County, but they're
Stationed.
stationed
Yeah,
or
so-
wherever they're located
They're
temporarily.
Yeah, it's a combination of, we've got a lot of expats too.
Mhm.
People that really don't ever intend to come back, but they want to keep voting here, and that's totally fine. Students that are traveling, some people that are out of town because they're visiting family that lives there, and then military members that are stationed on bases and things. So on election day, and I also want to provide more context to this because I put this on our social media, and it is true, obviously, like these were the busiest polling locations. One of the reasons why, and this is not to undercut Dave or anything like that, Ashland, turns out, we already saw that. Hallsville, Ashland, Centralia. What we had done in the past, and you can see this because the precinct numbers changed. For November 22, we had like 73, 74 polling locations. We opened 60 polling locations this year. That's significantly fewer. One of the reasons for that was because we are still having a very hard time finding enough judges, particularly Republican judges. And if we can't find Republican supervisors, we cannot reliably open a poll. And we learned that lesson in November of 22, where we really overextended ourselves and had some polls that just had really terrible experiences and a lot of voter complaints. And it wasn't because of the polling place, and it wasn't because anybody was a bad person or anything. It was just we overextended ourselves, and that consequence was that voters did not have a great experience sometimes. So in August, like as we were looking to November, because that's how early we have to set the polling places, we made the decision to keep it to 60, no more than 60. So we looked at the different locations that we would have, and from feedback that we got from people as well, that yes, well, it's nice to have more polling locations. Lots of people get used to, we have a core number in April and August of 44. And people that are tried and true voters get used to their location. When you add more to that, you have to move the voters to the different polls. And in places like Hallsville, Ashland, Centralia, even though we were trying to, like, for example, not have 2,000 people show up at the Hallsville Baptist Church, they preferred to have 2,000 people show up at the location that they already knew instead of moving them and splitting them up so that they would show up at the wrong place. So we did that for Hallsville. Normally we would have had 2. We only had 1. Ashland, we would have had 4. We only had 2. Centralia, we would have had 2. We only have 1. So that's one of the reasons why you see such popularity there. They also tend to be the areas that had fewer absentee proportion because voters in those areas weren't as high rates of absentee voters. So they wanted to wait till election day. So they're going to be busier polling places. Memorial Union is kind of an outlier because college students, they show up at the very high numbers during presidential elections and then not at all the rest of the time. But for these, it was very popular. And then Community Methodist Church. And so anywhere where we could not really open up more or where we had suggestions or feedback to keep it steady, that's kind of what you're seeing in these as the busiest, which is why I, on social media, put out both busiest polling locations and highest turnout overall to indicate, like, just because it was busy on election day doesn't mean it was the highest turnout area. Hallsville was not the highest turnout area. They just had a lot of people on election day. But we also, I think it's also very useful because it also kind of shows all the planning that we put in place in August really paid off for this, because Hallsville usually votes at their community center, and we knew that it wasn't going to be able to handle that traffic. So we did move it, but we moved everybody. So we didn't really hear, oh, this is a problem, because everybody went there. Everybody knew to go there. Same with Centralia. They're normally at City Hall. City Hall cannot handle 2,000 people. Impact Support Services bought the East Annex building that they have up there, and they were more than happy to let us use it. So the space and the locations is really great. The Optimist Club and the Senior Center are really wonderful, and Community Methodist is big and wonderful too, to be able to handle all of that. And it was kind of the gamble that we took in hoping that we would get to very high absentee proportions, that it would offset some of these. Because if you look at the total numbers of voters that could have potentially voted at these polls, it is far more than 2,000, even if we had a low election. And so having the no excuse available also allowed us to responsibly have 60 polls and not have crazy lines all day.
If you add the early voting numbers to the list of voters you see here, the Ashland, both the Ashland ones would be 1 and 2.
Yeah.
I did that on my own with a spreadsheet, and yeah, early voting made a huge difference in making it easier to vote on election day.
Yep. Provisional ballots, because I know that this comes up quite a bit. And I brought more detailed information as well, because we have to provide that to the state. Yep. But the provisional ballots, yellow provisional ballots, are ones where somebody thinks they're eligible and they are not, unfortunately, but they think that they're eligible for a variety of reasons. They think that they registered online. We don't have any record of that. They think they registered at the DMV. We don't have any record of that. We look into all of those. So when the provisional ballots come back, If they say that they registered with the DMV, we call the DMV and say, can you send us the documentation? And that determines whether they can or can't. To be perfectly honest, of the 17 that were counted for this, many of them were ones that should have actually been blue provisionals. Blue provisionals are ones where you don't have the right ID. So that's why there's so many more of them. So if you don't have the right ID, then you should be getting a blue provisional. If you accidentally got a yellow one, it really doesn't make a difference. We'll still count it as long as you're eligible. But if you just looked at people that were truly not eligible because they weren't at the right polling place or they weren't registered at all, it would have been far fewer. So 17 of those were counted. Blue, kind of similar in terms of what were the reasons for rejecting them. We did have a relatively high number of signatures not matching, and that is an artifact of, we have a bipartisan team that comes in and they look at those signatures, and it's very broad, it's very discretion based, that, you know, if you have signed something, which a lot of people do, where they'll sign when they're registering to vote because they're busy, even if it's not online. Lots of times the online signature actually looks quite a bit like the signature on the envelope. But if you register to vote at Memorial Union and you sign it as a straight line, and then you on this are so detailed and write your beautiful little signature, there's no way that you can match those, which is really unfortunate. But that is something that did happen, and we had, of all of the ones that didn't count, it was only 40 of them that were rejected because the signatures didn't match. So the rest of them that weren't, the 11 more that weren't, were because they should have been yellow provisionals. They weren't eligible for another reason. It didn't have anything to do with their ID. They weren't registered by the deadline, or they didn't get registered in Boone County. They stayed registered in Greene County, for example, and they could have come to our office and filled something out, but they didn't. So that's, I think, always a consequence, and that's why I like to bring it up, of having 2 different colored envelopes, because sometimes you put it in the wrong one, but at the end of the day, they're all treated the same.
Is that just a matter of training for the judges?
Some of it's that, but I think some of it is, you know, like if you've got a stack of blue and a stack of yellow and you are just trying to hurry up and get somebody voted, you just grab whatever one's available. Because at the end of the day, they still get treated the same way.
Oh.
We could make them all green and it would still not make any difference, because if we look them up and they're eligible, then we know that they're a need ID person.
So you're gonna do that then?
Make them all green. I am not in charge of getting the provisional ballot envelopes. The state provides those to us. So the state determines that they should be blue and yellow.
Does it make any difference on process? You say if it's a blue one, you can start, this is probably what the issue is.
Yeah.
But makes it a little bit streamlined maybe.
Yeah. And you can see, I mean, I'd say the vast majority of the time, they're in the right category they're supposed to be. That's why you see such a big discrepancy between the number of yellow and blue. And prior to photo ID, those numbers were swapped. So prior to photo ID, yellow would have been 470 cast-ish, like if we were going to do that, but still 17 counted, because most yellows get rejected. So it's really difficult to extricate exactly the consequences of House Bill 1878, because it did both. It made the yellows go down and it made the blues go up, but more blues count. Kind of hard to tell.
What were the problems that people had with ID? What did
They might have an out-of-state ID. A lot of them have an out-of-state ID.
Expired.
Those used to count, but now.
Yeah.
I don't know, was this election the first one that didn't count?
No, November 22 was the first election.
One together for me.
So yeah, expiration is a big one. But most of the time, like if you're just looking at raw numbers, it's usually that they have an out-of-state ID. And one of the things that we are pushing as a clerks association to change is those blue provisionals are not available during absentee voting. So we have lots of people that came in to do in-person absentee voting that had like an Illinois license, and we were like, you can't vote today. You have to wait till election day. And I think we all recognize, like in the association, that there's really no reason for that. It's just kind of a oversight in the law when it got passed that like you can't give out blue provisionals during absentee, but you can give out yellow. So if you're sure that you're registered at the DMV and you come to vote absentee, you can vote because we'll give you a yellow provisional ballot. We may have to reject it later, but at least you can vote while you're there. But if you don't have the right ID, you either have to come back with the correct ID or you just have to wait till election day.
But if you accidentally give them a yellow one, but it should have been a blue one, then there's more chance of getting counted.
Well, it won't happen during absentee voting because absentee voting, we only do provisionals in our physical office. So if you showed up at a satellite location, we're not going to issue a provisional ballot, period. We're going to tell you to go to the county clerk's office because yellow means that you've got a problem with your record and we want to deal with it before we get to election day. Because we might be able to prevent someone from becoming a yellow provisional ballot by fixing their record before election day.
Even downtown during early voting at the government center, we'd have people show up and we had to send them upstairs to your office to get the, so they wait in line for 40 minutes out and then go upstairs to get their correct provisional.
Yep.
Where is Community Methodist Church? No.
Also, West Broadway.
No, that's Broadway Christian.
That was a question we had in the
So,
chat.
Isn't it out there by the Walmart in the west?
Yes.
Yeah, it's further out off of West Broadway.
Yes.
Just on the other side of
Yeah.
These are like things that, I should know, but I'm directionally challenged. And so I know where it is on a map, but I don't know. Oh, yes, it is on West Broadway. It's just farther up.
But have you never worn somewhere? Okay, we're all caught up on the chat.
It's sort of close to form. And,
That was the last.
Oh, that was the last slide?
Yeah. So, I think I
He
hit
said
everything.
something about independence. So if you were a poll worker and said you were independent,
If you're independent, you can't be a judge. We can't be a supervisor, which is one of the issues that we
Oh.
have. So, yes, we can use independents at the polling places,
yeah.
but they can't outnumber partisan judges.
Mhm.
So we still can only use them in a limited capacity. And yes, it is more likely that we will use independents. But more often than not, if we need to fill in anybody, it's going to be a Republican judge.
Yeah.
So even if we need somebody and somebody said they were an independent, we still might not be able
So
to.
did you get some from another county?
No, I think that was another part of 1878 that passed in 2022, because previously we would have to ask permission from each other, like as clerk, to borrow people.
Yeah.
And we got rid of that requirement thinking like, oh, okay, at least we won't have to deal with that obstacle. But I think just the logistics issue of the polls open early.
Yeah.
And if you have to be at one at 5 a.m., do you really want to drive 45 minutes?
Yeah.
So, I mean, for that matter, every county surrounding us would love to have Democrats. They don't have nearly enough Democrats. So if anybody wanted to go drive to Audrain, they would love to have you.
Yeah.
But it's just really hard to ask people to do that for such a long day.
Do you know if you had any skeptics about the voting process that you could
Yes.
to understand?
I don't know our conversion rate. I do know that we do have a lot of skeptics. Well, not a lot, but we do have some skeptics. We have invited them in. Some of them have served as election judges. Some of them served on our board of verification. Our general outlook on things is to keep open lines of communication with everybody. So I reply to every email that somebody asks questions about. We offer to not just have them learn more about the process, but become part of the process so that they can see all of the different parts of it. We don't have harassment and things like that. I think we have a really great community. So it's still something that I keep in mind when I'm doing kind of voter education is making sure that we're still addressing any of the areas that people are bringing up. I talk a lot about how we test our equipment before and after, how we make sure that we have chain of custody in place and things like that. And I think there's always room for improvement, and if people have feedback and suggestions, we're always open hearing that too.
I have to say that some of the best election judges I've worked with in my few years supervising have been people who showed up as skeptics and thought the whole process was crooked and they were going to find out what was wrong. And they turned out to be fabulous election judges and understood by the time they checked in their sixth or eighth voter, wow, this system really works great. And then by the time we close at night and they see all of the precautions that are put in place and all the signatures needed and how everybody has to look at everything, they're pretty impressed, at least with how it works in Boone County, and I hope in the rest of the state.
Yeah, I think pretty universally, we have good processes that we've shared ideas with other counties. I mean, as our association has kind of turned over, there were like probably 40 new clerks that was their first presidential election this year. And as an association, we have prioritized more mentoring and more training so that we can like keep in touch with everybody, but also make sure that we're all consistent so that we have good processes.
I think the new Secretary of State states he wants hand-counted ballots.
He does. That's true.
That's all you can say about that.
I do not know what's going to happen. He's not in office yet, so.
Oh, one of the Tillemans has their hand up so politely. I had not seen that. Like Sue, maybe. So unmute and ask a question. Should know there.
Okay. It's me. It's me. Our daughter, our older daughter, Anne, this is a statement more than anything, was head of Democrats Abroad for a year. I think that was around 91, 92, somewhere in there. And she instigated getting to have a session with the Democratic presidential candidates. And so when she was home at Christmas, I don't remember what country it was, she had a open phone with the candidate and the group in that other country. I was somewhere in Europe, and our house. And I got to listen in. It was really fun. It wasn't a very big group at the other end, but it wasn't mostly military. It was mostly people that lived there or were there for assignment for something. Anyway, she said, "Mom, you can't say a word." But it was so impressive. And here these handful of people got to have a question and answer with the presidential candidates. I mean, who gets that?
I don't know how it works for the Republicans overseas, but the Democrats are predominantly those who vote, not in the military, but the U.S. Army is the one who organizes this on behalf of all overseas citizens. And it's also Democrats Abroad happens to be the most progressive unit by a considerable margin, a state unit in the Democratic Party.
Thanks for sharing that.
I have a question or observation, maybe. I noticed when we first got, or I remember first dealing with the disabled voters, when we first got those electronic machines, people lined up for it. I had people sitting, I was in charge of that machine at my polling place. And if I had two machines, we could have voted twice as many people because they were just lined up. And then the novelty wore off. And now, unless we really, we get very few people using it. I'm wondering, even though this wasn't the first election for this no excuse absentee voting, it was the first one that was really promoted and people knew about it. Do you see that maybe be on a novelty? Oh, we can come vote early. Oh, but there's a long line. Next time I'll just come to a polling place. Do you see that? Or it sounds like you're hoping we'll continue to get more and more no excuse absentee voters.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the fact that even though there were lines, people were still happy that they did it, as opposed to some of the experiences with the touchscreen machines, which are, and we still had over 1,000 people use the touchscreen accessible machines. But it's a little more hit and miss. Like, oh, this isn't as, I thought this would be faster,
Right.
or I thought this would be different. There was really no unequivocation when you voted absentee. People were happy about it and they liked it. And I think especially, I think there's a kind of a human psychological component of, I'm choosing to be here to do this early. I'm choosing to be instead of doing election day, this is more convenient. I know that I have options, as opposed to when you vote on election day, you have no other option. That is the only chance that you have to vote. And it may mean, well, and it has in the past, I think people get very, very heated very quickly on election day because they know that they don't have another day to do it. There's a lot more patience involved in absentee voting, and it's a lot easier to explain to people, hey, even if you don't want to do it today, you can do it tomorrow.
Like on election day, if someone shows up at the wrong poll at 10 minutes till 7,
Right.
I don't have time to get across town to the correct one.
Right. And that's part of, I think, the way that I like to talk about it is election day is now your last opportunity to vote, not your only opportunity. So remember that you've got all of this period of time. And I think it kind of helps de-escalate situations sometimes as well, to think about it that way.
I wanted to ask about, you said like over 100 ballot styles. What could be some differences that make that many different ballot styles?
So for this election, everything is based on district lines. So you've got a northern and a southern commission district that cuts across. You've got the state representative districts that cut across. You've got the congressional districts that cut across. And none of them line up with each other. It's not like the congressional lines are exactly the same as the commission lines. So you got two different lines cutting across the middle of the county. And then for some things, like Hallsville put a ballot initiative on. So then the city of Hallsville versus the rest of the people that live around Hallsville but not in the city also had different ballot styles. So that's why April is always so much more, even though there's fewer people, because you're cutting in school districts, water districts, fire protection districts, city council, you got everything. So that's why I say this is one of the fewest numbers, because there's just fewer. But then also, even if you didn't just do all that, that's why I say when we did the faces, it was reduced down to like 10, because really there are only 10. Every polling place has to have its own style too. So if we open 60 polling locations, that's already 60 different ballot styles. Because if we don't do that, then you can't break out precinct results. So even if your ballot looks exactly the same as somebody else's, if you voted a different poll, you're going to have a different ballot style. And then on top of that, then you say, okay, well, the people at this polling place come from 2 different House districts and 2 different commission districts. So we need 4 different ballot styles here. I think American Legion keeps beating everybody with like 5 different, you got to have like 5 different styles at the American Legion.
Primary, you get at least 4 different parties. You got to, I hate this.
Yeah. And that is also where the ballot on demand came in so handy. And especially for this last August, we had so many nonpartisan ballots requested that we started running out of nonpartisan ballots. And we were like, we've never had people requesting nonpartisan ballots, but we don't have to worry about our central polling locations when that happens, because they can print them on demand. So for all of the other ones, we were driving out nonpartisan ballots just to be like, here you go. But every nonpartisan ballot had to be the ballot style for the poll. We couldn't just say, oh, nonpartisan has the same thing for everybody, so we can give it to everybody. It's not how it gets programmed.
Well, thank you.
I was going to say one other thing on the lines. If you got there and you saw this huge line, but it started moving so fast, it turned out to be a fun event to be at.
True.
And I
There
think
are a lot of people that said that too.
So I felt like it was a very positive thing, because you got to see people you hadn't seen in a long time. And
I had a friend that said that it was the longest they'd been able to see their spouse in a few weeks. And so it was like a little date for them waiting in line.
My goodness.
Because they'd been so busy.
Yeah.
May I say, Brianna, congratulations on a job well done. We thank you very much.
Here.
It's really a team effort.
All right, it is 17 after 1. I just remembered I'm the host. I'm like, who's gonna call this? So thank you very much for your time. We know you have things to get back and do, but we appreciate you coming and sharing your insights with us.
Thanks, sorry I was late.
No, it's okay.
Also in the chat, I posted a link to the Boone County election results where you can actually see for yourself the precinct by precinct by precinct results, which are pretty informative. You can see some areas getting redder and some aren't.
We've already done our announcements, so I guess we'll just, there's no other business that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
And so we'll just conclude the meeting and see everybody online next week.
Yeah.
Interesting to see how we're going to moderate that discussion.
Yeah.
We'll have to
I
raise
think Al Tacco's gonna be
people have-
back.
oh yeah, it won't be me. People have to raise their hands, I guess. All right.